Hello, everyone. I just want to talk about something that's been doing the rounds a lot lately on social media, which is supposed Arab colonialism. You mostly hear about this in the context of defenders and supporters of Israel, who tend to bring this up as a very cynical reaction to Palestinians framing their struggle against Israeli colonialism as well a colonial one. So they say, actually, you guys are the real colonizers, not us, because Arab colonialism happened in 700 AD, 1400 years ago. Ergo, you're the colonizers, my friends. And from the beginning, it's just this very cynical sort of reaction rather than a genuine exploration of the topic. Like, did Arab colonialism exist? If it did, what was it, etc.? No, it's just, let's look at the past and let's manipulate it for our own modern political ends. Actually, I'm being generous there by implying at all that they look at the past, because they really don't. But anyway, at its core, this is just fundamentally a more modern and Israeli version of historical black pygmy myths. Now, black pygmy myths are myths that tend to be hatched in settler colonial countries, most notably Australia and more recently Taiwan, that claim that the indigenous peoples of these countries aren't actually the real indigenous peoples because they wiped out a group of people that were there before them, which were supposedly black pygmies or something. And to further this mythology, there's this whole industry of looking for ancient remains of people who happen to be shorter than usual or whatever, and being like, this is proof, you guys aren't the real indigenous people. Ergo, the implication is that what we've done to you is fine, etc. You get the idea. And this whole Arab colonialism thing is just the Israeli spin on that. It's historical mythologizing to be like, hey, you guys are not the real indigenous people. Ergo, what we're doing to you is just fine. But anyway, apart from that, the biggest problem with this whole talking point is that Arab colonialism was not a thing. Conquest of other places by Arabic-speaking people who may have been from the region historically known as Arabia absolutely did happen, but that's not what colonialism is. Colonialism is specifically exploitation for the benefit of a motherland, that or replacement of a native population with a foreign one of settlers, or sometimes both at the same time. It's not conquest followed by the installation of a new ruler, it's rather something even more heinous and exploitative. And it's actually been quite rare throughout history, which is why the more modern phenomenon of colonialism of the last 400, 500 years or so has been, so focused on, not just because it's so recent, but because it really is something of an outlier. Throughout history, aiming to outright wipe out or replace entire groups of people, or to treat entire groups of people as little more than like beasts of burden, that hasn't been very common at all. Of course, there's been slavery, there's been tons of conquests, all sorts of awful things, and a few times things like that have absolutely happened, but nowhere near to the frequency and the concentration they have during the last few centuries. And that's why this era of colonialism has been so significant, so focused on. Not just because of its recency, as I just said earlier, but because it's way more brutal. It really has been. The historical standard going back before that, yeah, lots of conquests, lots of atrocities, lots of destruction, etc., etc. But the end result isn't the literal wiping out of the people who were there. It's generally been a replacement of the ruling class. And that's what so-called Arab colonialism was. Largely the replacement of the rulers, the replacement of the people at the top, the replacement of the people who, are doing the exploiting of the people below them, but not specifically for the benefit of some foreign land, not treating them as little more than cattle in general on a racial or ethnic basis, etc. So what happened in Palestine specifically with so-called Arab colonialism is that religion changed, culture changed, language changed, but the people there were not literally replaced with settlers from 5,000 kilometers away or whatever. They were the same people, and those same people largely are the people who make up the Palestinian population today. And this is not unique to Palestine at all. This has happened all over the world. This is essentially the standard of not human history, but rather human history over the last couple thousand years or so. Not the colonial sort of conquest carried out in order to replace wholesale entire populations, discriminate against them on an explicitly racial basis, and exploit them for some faraway motherland, but rather just replacement of the people who rule over them, while life in general sort of largely goes on as it had before. You know, you might change your religion, your language, your culture, but at the end of the day, you're just a peasant who happens to be working for a different lord. It's also very interesting how supposed Arab colonialism is only really brought up as a deflection. For one, in the Israeli case, as I just went over, and it's also sometimes brought up to deflect from European racial slavery. So I guess I'll cover the differences there as well while we're here. Historic Arab/Muslim, because you know these people just use Arab as a synonym for Muslim mostly. Slavery was quite different to the racial slavery that was born in the European New World colonies. Because for one, slaves could only be captives of war, and for two, they couldn't be Muslim. So you could convert to get out of slavery, at least in theory. Obviously, these laws were broken a lot of the time, but that's fundamentally different to the slavery that there was in the European New World colonies, where if you were a certain race, you could be enslaved for life by law, and that was that. You had no way out of it, nothing like that. So European sort of racial slavery was a unique innovation of the New World European colonies. So to summarize here, it's all well and good to talk about colonialism, to analyze things through the lens of colonialism, but what this Arab colonialism talking point mostly is just people who are seeing others talking about colonialism in a very honest way, using the term correctly, and then wanting to sort of poison the well a bit and, you know, dilute things and confuse things by being like, hey, what about this other thing? And they're not really interested in correctly applying the term. You know, they're not really interested in an honest discussion. All they're really interested in is, you know, diverting attention away from the problem at hand, which in this case is very real, ongoing, modern day Israeli colonialism 99% of the time. But, you know, it kind of doesn't work because we're not talking about the actual replacement of people. We're talking about changes in culture, religion, language, etc. Your culture can change, your language can change, your religion can change. But that's not the same as you being ethnically cleansed and replaced with settlers from a faraway land. That didn't happen in Palestine until Zionists did it. That's simple.